The night the sky split open, Ethan Walker thought it was the end. He had no idea it was the beginning. The land was dying, not all at once, not loudly, but slowly, quietly, like a long, painful goodbye. Ethan Walker stood on the porch of the creaking farmhouse that had been in his family for 3 generations. His broad shoulders hunched slightly, not from age, but from years of burdens too heavy to carry with pride anymore. In one calloused hand, he clutched a wrinkled letter that might as well have been a noose. Final notice, foreclosure, in 30 days. He didn't read it again. He didn't need to. The words had been etched into his brain, like the lines on his weathered face. Ethan's gaze swept across the barren fields that stretched endlessly under the sinking sun, where golden crops once danced in the summer wind. Now there was only cracked soil and broken dreams. The drought had scorched the life out of the land, and out of him too. He exhaled slowly, feeling the quiet press down on him. Not just the quiet of nature, but the kind that comes after too many years of silence at the dinner table. The kind that follows a voice you'll never hear again. Emily, her name still echoed inside him, soft as a prayer, sharp as a blade. It had been 3 years since cancer took her, and not a day had passed when he didn't talk to her in his head, when he didn't wonder what she'd say about the dying farm, the debt, the loneliness. You always saw hope, even in a dust storm, he imagined her whispering. So why give up now? But he was tired of being strong, tired of fighting a losing war against time and nature. The sun dipped lower behind the hills, bleeding red into the sky like an open wound. Ethan turned to go inside, until the ground beneath him trembled. Boom! The sky cracked like thunder from nowhere. Birds scattered, dogs howled, and a low roar followed, mechanical and fast. Ethan's heart jumped as he spun around. A streak of smoke and flame blazed across the sky, cutting through the clouds like a burning arrow. It was a plane, small, private, spiraling out of control. Then came the crash, a sound so violent, it echoed through the valley. Trees shook, the cornfield lit up, like it had finally caught fire from all the prayers left unanswered. Ethan ran. No hesitation, no thought, just boots pounding against scorched earth, legs cutting through brittle stalks of corn that crackled underfoot like dry bones. His heart was thudding, not just from the run, but from the terrifying thought, someone's in that plane. As he neared the wreckage, the scent of burning fuel hit him hard. The aircraft had sliced through the field and skidded into a shallow ravine near his barn. One wing was shredded, the engine hissed smoke, the twisted steel glinted beneath the moonlight. Inside, slumped across the pilot's seat, was a woman. Blood was smeared across her temple, her helmet cracked, her breathing shallow, but she was alive. Ethan didn't stop to wonder who she was. He ripped open the cockpit door with all the strength left in him. "Hey, can you hear me?" he shouted, voice cracking. "Stay with me." She stirred faintly, her head tilted toward him, and for a second, just a second, her eyes opened, storm gray, mysterious, frightened, beautiful. And then she whispered, barely audible, "Help me, I've got you." He said, his voice low and firm, laced with something he hadn't felt in a long time, purpose. Carefully, he pulled her from the wreck, carrying her like something sacred. She was light, too light, and yet there was a heaviness about her, a weight in the way she breathed, as if she were holding in more than just pain. Who was she? Where had she come from? None of that mattered now. As Ethan stepped through the smoke and broken stalks, this stranger unconscious in his arms, one truth struck him harder than the explosion ever could. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The rain came late that night. Not a downpour, just a soft drizzle, enough to make the world feel like it was weeping with him. Ethan had managed to carry the woman into his farmhouse before the clouds broke open. He laid her gently on the couch, her skin cold, clothes torn, and lips pale. The thin line of blood trickled from her temple. She looked fragile, almost ethereal, like she belonged in a different world, one far from this dying farm. He knelt beside her, chest rising and falling with panic. It had been years since he had touched someone like this, not with need or desperation, but with a kind of reverence. He grabbed a first aid kit from the cabinet and began cleaning the wound, hands shaking slightly. "Come on," he whispered, more to himself than to her. "Stay with me." She didn't wake. He stitched her forehead with careful hands, pressing a cool cloth to her cheeks, brushing damp strands of dark hair away from her face. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Every few seconds, her eyebrows twitched, like she was running from something even in her dreams. Lightning flashed through the window. Ethan sat back, staring at her face in the flickering light. She was striking, even in her broken state. High cheekbones, soft determined jawline. She had the look of someone who'd lived hard and fast, and yet something vulnerable clung to her. Who crashes a plane in the middle of Kansas? He glanced at the table where her duffel bag lay, half burnt, soaked in rain and dirt. No ID, no wallet, no phone, just a monogram stitched into the lining. He leaned back in his chair, fatigue catching up to him. As the clock ticked past midnight, the silence of the farmhouse pressed in again, but it was different this time. Not empty, not hollow, there was someone here now. The next morning, he awoke on the floor, having drifted off beside her. The fire was down to embers. Outside, the sky was gray. He opened his eyes to find hers already watching him. Storm gray, sharp, alert, and scared. "Where am I?" she croaked. "You're safe," Ethan said softly, moving slowly as not to startle her. "My name's Ethan. You crashed in my field last night." She tried to sit up, winced and fell back. "The plane. Destroyed," he nodded. "You're lucky to be alive." She looked around the room. Old wooden walls, faded curtains, a fireplace, shelves of dusty books and farming manuals. It was clear she didn't belong here. Her confusion deepened. "You live here alone?" "Just me and the land," he replied. "Though it hasn't been much of a friend lately." A beat of silence passed. Her fingers gripped the blanket tightly. "Your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "Then Ava," he nodded. "Ava, just Ava," she said, her tone final. Ethan noticed how her voice, though weak, carried weight, like she wasn't used to being questioned. Her posture was proud, even injured. She wasn't just mysterious, she was used to control. Later that day, he made soup. It wasn't much, just chicken broth and carrots from the last harvest, but she accepted it with a quiet thank you. They sat together at the kitchen table, the storm still whispering outside. "You fly often?" he asked. She gave a faint smile. "Enough to know that landing wasn't my best." "Looks like you've done it before," he observed. "You're not just some lost tourist." "I'm not lost," she replied. Her voice clipped. "Just needed a way out." Ethan looked at her carefully, the flickering lamplight casting shadows across her face. She wasn't just running from a storm in the sky. She was running from something deeper, and somehow, he understood that, because he was running too. Only his storm had no end in sight. That night, he offered her the guest room, unused for years, but she asked to stay near the fire. He gave her extra blankets, and sat with her for a while. Neither spoke much, but in the silence, something stirred. Not attraction, not yet, something gentler. Recognition. Two broken people, thrown together by fate, both carrying wounds the other couldn't see. And as she drifted into sleep, Ethan leaned back in the armchair, eyes never leaving her. He didn't know who she really was, but something deep in his gut told him she didn't fall into his field by accident. Ava was healing, but she wasn't opening. 3 days had passed since the crash. Her wounds were healing slowly, thanks to Ethan's quiet care, but her walls remained intact. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when she did, it was always guarded. Her voice clipped, like she was afraid of saying too much. Still, Ethan noticed things. She flinched at loud noises. She stared out the window longer than anyone who wasn't lost. She wore silence like armor. And yet, there were moments when something cracked. Ethan woke early every day, as always, but now there was a second coffee mug on the porch railing. He had caught her there once, standing in his oversized flannel shirt, barefoot, watching the sun rise over the broken fields. Her silhouette against the soft pink sky looked almost unreal, like a painting hanging in the wrong house. She didn't speak that morning, neither did he. They just stood in silence, two strangers with nothing but pain in common, breathing in the fragile beauty of the dawn. And somehow, it was enough. On the fourth morning, she asked if she could walk with him. Her ankle was still sore, but she insisted. Ethan handed her his late wife's old cane, a beautifully carved piece of oak. Ava accepted it without comment, but he noticed how gently she ran her fingers over the wood, like she could feel the history etched into it. They walked between rows of ruined crops, talking very little. When she asked him why he stayed on the land, despite everything, he paused for a long time. "Because this land remembers her," he finally said, "and some days it remembers me too." Ava didn't reply. She just touched his arm, soft and brief, but it lingered, and it meant everything. That evening, the power flickered during a storm, and the two of them sat by candlelight in the living room. Ethan played a worn record on an old player, something soft and bluesy. Ava curled up on the couch, a blanket around her shoulders. "You don't ask many questions," she said suddenly. "I figure you'll tell me what you want me to know," he answered. "That's dangerous," he chuckled. "So is crashing into a stranger's field." She smiled for the first time, really smiled, and it knocked the air out of him. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because it was the first time she looked free. "I wasn't trying to die," she whispered, "but I wasn't trying to live either. I was running." "From what?" Her eyes clouded. "Everything." And then she asked softly, "Have you ever felt trapped inside a life that looks perfect on the outside, but feels like a prison on the inside?" He didn't answer with words, just nodded, because he understood. The rain tapped on the roof above them, the fire crackled, their eyes met, not with passion, not yet, but with something more honest. Recognition, a silent agreement between two people who had nothing left to hide, because neither had anything left to lose. Ava leaned back against the couch, the candlelight casting golden shadows across her face. "You saved me," she said softly. Ethan shook his head. "No, you landed here. I just didn't let you bleed out." Her lips twitched into the ghost of another smile. "Still counts." He turned to the window, voice quiet. "Sometimes, I think maybe you were meant to land here." A beat passed. "Maybe I was," she whispered. The storm had passed, but something else was beginning to stir, something neither of them was ready to name. Ava was healing, slowly. The gash on her forehead had formed a delicate scar, and the bruises on her side faded like old memories. But her eyes still held a storm. Ethan noticed everything. How she'd linger by the fireplace longer than necessary. How her hands trembled when she tried to hold a mug too tightly. How she woke in the middle of the night, gasping like she'd been drowning in dreams. She didn't speak of her past, and he didn't push, but the silence between them had changed. It wasn't awkward anymore. It was intimate. One morning, Ethan walked into the kitchen to find the table set, 2 plates, 2 cups, and Ava standing in his apron, trying and failing to flip pancakes. She looked up, cheeks flushed, and said, "I thought I'd give back, but clearly, I'm a danger in kitchens too." He grinned. "That depends. Did you burn the house down?" "Almost."
"That's impressive." They laughed. Real laughter, the kind that fills a room and makes the walls feel alive again. And in that moment, the farmhouse didn't feel so lonely. She handed him a plate with 1 perfect pancake and 3 that looked like abstract art. "You kept the best one for me?" he teased. "I owed you," she said. "You stitched my head. Least I can do is not poison you." Ethan sat across from her, their knees brushing under the table. He didn't move, neither did she. That afternoon, They walked the fence line. The air was warm, humming with the sound of crickets. Ava wore one of Ethan's old flannel shirts again, the sleeves rolled up, her hair tied loosely. She leaned on the cane as they strolled slowly down the worn path between the trees. "This place," she murmured. "It's so quiet, it's loud." He glanced at her. "Too quiet." "No, just." Ethan paused, resting one hand on the fence post, the wood dry beneath his palm. "This place is all I've got," he said. "But lately, I've wondered if it's even mine anymore. Feels like I'm just borrowing time." Ava looked at him then, not with pity, but with something else, recognition. "You're not borrowing," she said. "You're holding on. That takes strength." He swallowed hard. No one had said something kind to him in a long, long time. That night, they sat by the fire again. Ava was curled on the couch, blanket tucked under her chin, while Ethan sat on the floor nearby, sipping coffee, staring into the flames. He finally asked the question that had been burning in him for days. "Were you running from someone, Ava?" She looked at him, her jaw tight. "No," she said. "I was running from everyone." A long silence. She turned her eyes to the fire. "I used to live in a world where everything was perfect. Fancy houses, lavish parties, people pretending they loved you, only until you stopped giving them what they wanted. And when I tried to leave it behind, they told me I was ungrateful, irresponsible, crazy." Her voice cracked. "I wasn't any of those things. I just wanted to feel real again." Ethan stared at her, really stared, and felt something inside him shift. "I don't know much about your world," he said softly, "but I know this. Anyone who walks away from a lie to find the truth, that's not weakness, Ava. That's the bravest thing I've ever heard." She blinked, holding his gaze, and for a moment, the wall between them wasn't just cracked, it collapsed. He reached forward, just a small gesture, and placed his hand over hers. It was warm, steady, wordless. She didn't pull away. In fact, she turned her palm slightly, inviting the touch. They sat like that in silence, not needing anything else. No explanations, no promises, just the quiet reassurance that somehow, in the wreckage of their lives, they had found something that still felt whole. It started with a scar, not the one on Ava's forehead, but the one on Ethan's chest, the one no one could see. They were sitting in the barn that afternoon, a soft breeze drifting through the slats in the wood, the scent of hay and earth wrapped around them like a memory. Ava sat on a wooden bench, her knees drawn up, while Ethan repaired a broken gate latch nearby. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked suddenly. He looked up, brow furrowed. "Leaving what?" "This place, the farm, this whole life." Ethan took a deep breath and set down the wrench. He leaned against the wall and wiped his hands on a rag. "I used to. After Emily passed, I didn't see much point in staying. Everything reminded me of her. Every corner of this house, every creak in the floor. It all felt like a haunted memory." Ava turned to face him, her eyes soft. "And now?" He shrugged. "Now, it still hurts. But I guess I'd rather live with the ghosts than with regret." She loved this land. I think a part of her still lives in the wind here. Ava looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know what that's like." Ethan tilted his head. "You lost someone, not to death, just to life. My father, my mother, they're alive, but they don't see me anymore. Not the real me." She pulled her sleeves down slightly, as if trying to cover something invisible. "When I was a teenager, I wanted to be a pilot. My father said flying was a hobby, not a legacy. He wanted me to wear a suit, not wings. And you chose the sky anyway," Ethan said, admiration warming his voice. "I did," she whispered, "but it came with a price." He watched her quietly, sensing the weight of her story, but not rushing her to finish it. Instead, he stood, crossed the short space between them, and sat beside her on the bench. Close, but not too close. You know, he said, some people are born with roots, others with wings. The rare ones have both. They just need someone to remind them it's okay to use them. Ava turned her head slowly. Their eyes locked. There was something unspoken there, something raw and fragile and real. She blinked, and for the first time, her voice trembled. I don't know why I trust you. Maybe because I've got no reason to lie to you, he said softly. And because you haven't had someone just see you, not in a long time. Her lip quivered slightly, then impulsively, she leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there, letting her rest against him, her breath warm against his flannel shirt, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. That evening, they sat on the porch swing as the sun melted into gold behind the trees. Ava wore one of Emily's old knit cardigans. She didn't ask for it. Ethan had simply left it folded for her on the bed, and she had silently accepted it. You ever think about starting over? She asked. All the time, he said, but I'm not sure I'd know where to begin. She smiled, her eyes still on the horizon. I think it starts with moments like this. He turned his head.
What moment?
This one. She looked at him, really looked, her expression soft, searching, vulnerable, and for a heartbeat, the world paused, the air between them crackled, charged, tender, delicate. Ethan leaned forward just slightly, not enough to close the space, just enough to feel the possibility of her breath, but Ava pulled back, only a fraction, her voice gentle. Not yet.
He nodded.
No hurt in his eyes, only patience. Okay, and that meant more than a kiss ever could. Because he wasn't rushing her, he was waiting for her. The mornings had become a quiet kind of beautiful. Ethan would wake before dawn, and find Ava already moving around the kitchen barefoot, clutching a chipped mug of coffee like it was the only thing tethering her to earth. She moved slower now, with purpose, and smiled more often, even if the smiles didn't always reach her eyes. There were no labels for what they were, no promises, but something real had begun to bloom between them. Ava started helping him fix the barn roof, clean the tool shed, and once even joined him at the local farmer's market, wearing a straw hat and hiding behind oversized sunglasses. That day, she laughed freely. Ethan had never seen her look so alive, and for the first time in years, he let himself imagine a future again, one with her in it. But the world has a cruel way of catching up when you least expect it. It started with a look, then a question, then a whisper. Ava had stepped out of the truck at the local supply store, just to stretch her legs. Ethan had warned her that folks in town talked, but she shrugged it off with a wry smile. I've lived in the spotlight, Ethan. I think I can handle a few small town stares. But small towns didn't just stare, they studied, and they remembered. It was Mrs. Harlan, the retired school teacher with a camera phone, who took the blurry photo that broke the illusion. Ava Hamilton, daughter of Jonathan Hamilton, founder of the global aviation empire Hamilton Aeronautics, the reclusive heiress who vanished from the public eye after walking away from her father's empire, worth over $300 million. That photo went viral in a matter of hours, and by nightfall, reporters were knocking on Ethan's front gate. Ethan stood at the kitchen window, jaw tight, watching the flashing lights from cars at the edge of his land. They found you, he said without turning. Ava sat at the table, hands folded, her expression unreadable. I knew they would, she whispered. Eventually, he turned to face her. Why didn't you tell me? She met his eyes, hers suddenly filled with tears. Because the moment people know who I am, everything changes. They look at me like I'm a price tag, a scandal, or worse, a fantasy. You were the first person who looked at me like I was just Ava. His chest tightened. You could have told me. I wanted to, every day. But I was terrified the moment I did. I'd lose you too. Silence. Only the sound of the wind brushing against the windows. I don't care about your money, Ethan said quietly, voice low with emotion. But I care that you didn't trust me. Ava stood up, her voice trembling. I did trust you, that's why I didn't run again. But I knew the moment they came for me, it would ruin everything. He turned away. She stepped closer. Please, don't let this change what we had. What we had, he said, eyes on the floor, was simple, real, honest. Now I don't know what's real anymore. Those words landed like a hammer between them. Ava's shoulders dropped, her lips parted as if to say more, but no words came. Instead, she simply walked toward the door, pausing only once to look back. I never lied about what mattered, she said, but if you can't see past the name, maybe I should have crashed somewhere else. And just like that, she was gone. Ethan didn't sleep that night. The farmhouse was silent again, but not the peaceful kind, the kind that echoed with absence. Her laughter was gone, her warmth, her voice humming, as she cleaned up after breakfast. He sat on the porch swing, long after midnight, the letter from the bank still folded in his pocket, the world outside a blur of mist and regret, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like the one who had crashed, because she hadn't just landed in his field, she had landed in his heart, and now she was gone. The house was too quiet again, not peaceful, hollow, as if something sacred had been ripped from the wall. For days after Ava left, Ethan moved like a man underwater, slow, numb, and weighed down by something he couldn't name. He went through the motions, feeding the chickens, checking the fence line, driving into town, but nothing felt right. Everything reminded him of her. The cardigan she left draped over the porch railing, the half-empty coffee mug on the windowsill, the book she had fallen asleep reading on the couch, the empty space where she used to sit. One morning, he stood in the center of the cornfield, the same place her plane had crashed. The burnt stalks had been cleared, the ground tilled again, but the scar was still there. He crouched down, ran his fingers through the soil, and sighed. You saved my land, he whispered to the wind, and I pushed you away. He wasn't angry at her anymore. He was angry at himself. He had seen the truth in her eyes that night. She had never tried to hide what mattered. It wasn't the money, the name, or the past she had run from. It was pain. Pain that he of all people should have recognized. And he let her walk away. 3 days later, a white truck pulled up the gravel road. Ethan stepped outside, confused. A delivery man climbed out and handed him a folder. You Walker? Yeah. Got something for you. No return address, just instructions. He opened the folder slowly. Inside was a letter, handwritten, no signature. This land carries your soul, Ethan. You never gave up on it, even when it gave up on you. That's the kind of strength people write books about. You said this place remembered her. Now let it remember you too. Ethan's brow furrowed. He flipped the page, and what he saw next nearly knocked the breath out of him. A bank receipt, debt, cleared, all of it, every cent, accompanied by a note, paid in full, from someone who believes in your roots, because she still dreams with wings. Ethan stood frozen on his porch as the truck drove away. His hands trembled. He looked out at the fields, blinking back tears. She was gone, but she had never really left, because this was love in its truest form, not loud, not proud, not grandiose. It was quiet, selfless, undemanding, a love that asked for nothing in return, except that he keep going. That night, Ethan pulled out a faded photograph of Emily, his late wife, standing in front of the barn, smiling in the sunlight. He stared at it a long time, then gently, he placed the photo down, and whispered, "Thank you, for letting me go." It wasn't guilt that had kept him stuck all these years. It was fear. Fear of moving on, fear of losing again.
But Ava, this wild, stubborn, wounded woman, she had walked into his life like lightning and burned away everything that wasn't real. And now that she was gone, he knew exactly what he had to do. The morning Ethan decided to go after her, the skies were clear for the first time in weeks, not just outside, but inside him. He stood by the barn, boots laced, the letter she left,
held to his chest like a prayer. The debt was gone. The weight had lifted, but without her, everything still felt unfinished. He had spent too long letting love slip away, not again. He didn't know exactly where she was, but he had a clue. A news report he stumbled across the night before mentioned that Ava Hamilton had agreed to appear at a charity aviation gala in Denver, her first public appearance in over a year. She had vanished once. He wasn't going to let her do it again. He packed his truck with a change of clothes, a small bouquet of wild flowers picked from the edge of his fields, and the courage he hadn't felt since Emily died. And then he drove, mile after mile, through winding highways and empty plains, all the way to the city she once tried to leave behind. He was just a farmer, but she was more than a millionaire. She was the woman who had planted herself in his soul without warning, and he wasn't letting her fly away without hearing his heart first. That same morning, Ava stood in front of a mirror, in a sleek, elegant penthouse suite. She wore a navy blue gown tailored perfectly to her shape. Her makeup was flawless, her hair pinned with care, but her eyes, still searching. Her assistant Julia fussed around her. "The press will be there. You sure you're ready for this?" Ava gave a tight smile. "I've been through worse," but inside she wasn't ready. She missed the farmhouse. She missed the coffee that wasn't fancy, but warm. She missed the man who looked at her like she was human, not a headline. And even though she'd left him behind, she thought of him every time the wind touched her skin. The ballroom was glittering. Crystal chandeliers, polished speeches, cameras flashing. Ava stood on stage, delivering her message about giving back to rural communities and helping young pilots with dreams. The audience applauded politely, but something inside her was hollow. She scanned the room like she was looking for something, someone who wouldn't be there until he was. He didn't announce himself. He didn't wait for an introduction. Ethan walked into that ballroom in worn jeans, a clean button-up, and boots that still carried Kansas dust. People stared. Cameras flashed. Gasps echoed. Ava's heart stopped. He was here. She descended from the stage slowly, stunned. Her eyes shimmered. He met her halfway, holding out the small crumpled bouquet of wild flowers. Humble, beautiful, real. Her voice trembled. "What are you doing here?" "I came to tell you what I should have said the day you walked into my life," Ethan said, eyes never leaving hers. "I don't care who you are. I don't care what your name means, or how many zeros are in your account. I care that when you laugh, I feel peace. I care that when you leave, the world feels wrong, and I care that I love you." Ava, not Hamilton, just Ava. Tears spilled down her cheeks, silently. "And I'm not asking you to give anything up," he added softly. "But if there's still a piece of your heart in that little farmhouse, I want to build a life around it, around you." The world faded. The noise, the cameras, the crowd. It was just them. Ava stepped closer, her voice cracking. "You waited." He nodded. "Always." And then finally, she kissed him, soft, tender, full of everything unsaid. And in that kiss, they both knew they hadn't just survived a crash. They'd found something worth landing for. They returned to the farmhouse under a golden sky. The road was long and quiet, stretching out like a warm welcome from the land itself. Ava sat in the passenger seat, one hand resting on Ethan's, their fingers loosely laced together on the gear shift. She had traded her silk dress for denim and boots. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, her skin glowing in the sunlight. No makeup, no cameras, just her, just Ava. As the truck rolled up the gravel drive, Ava smiled softly. "It looks smaller than I remember," she said. "Still here though," Ethan replied. "Like us." She glanced at him, and leaned over to kiss his cheek, slow, gentle, lingering. "Thank you for coming after me." Ethan smiled, looking at her with something quiet and sacred in his gaze. "You didn't crash into my field. Ava, you landed in my life. She laughed, brushing a hand over his arm. That was cheesy. Yeah, but true. They spent the next few days cleaning, rebuilding, breathing life into the place. Ava painted the front porch, while humming a soft tune Ethan didn't recognize. Ethan fixed the old windmill, her laughter floating in the air whenever he lost balance, and swore under his breath. They cooked together, badly at first. Burnt toast, overcooked eggs, but it didn't matter. They were learning how to share space, how to build not just a home, but a rhythm. One night, she trailed her fingers along the wooden doorframe. Do you think this house can really hold both of us? She asked. He stepped behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. This house held me when I was empty. Now I want it to hold us full. She turned in his arms and looked into his eyes, filled with awe. You always say the exact right thing, he smiled. That's because I spent years saying nothing at all. One quiet evening, a storm rolled in, soft rain tapping against the windows, thunder rumbling gently in the distance. They sat by the fireplace once more, but this time, she wasn't on the couch. She was in his lap, her head tucked beneath his chin, his arms wrapped around her like a prayer answered. They weren't speaking, they didn't need to. His fingers brushed through her hair, her hand rested over his heart. The world felt still, like time had paused for them, not in tragedy, but in peace. Ava whispered into the silence, I didn't think I'd ever belong anywhere again. Ethan kissed her forehead. You don't belong to this land, you belong to me. She looked up, her eyes wide and glassy. You're not afraid of who I am. I'm afraid of losing who you are, he replied, and with that, she kissed him, not like the night in Denver, not for closure or passion, but for something else, for home. Weeks later, the fields bloomed again, with the debt cleared, and new irrigation from Ava's quiet investment. Ethan's farm finally began to breathe again, and this time, they planted together, not just crops, but hope. They stood side by side in the soil, hands dirty, laughter echoing over the hills. Ava turned to him, wiping sweat from her brow. You know I'm not going back, right? Not to the boardrooms, the interviews, the pretense. You can still fly, Ethan said. Just not away. She smiled. Only ever toward you. A full year had passed since the night the sky split open. The crash was long forgotten by the world, but not by Ethan Walker. To him, that night wasn't about a plane falling from the sky. It was the night a woman fell into his life and taught him how to live again. The farm had changed, not because of the money, but because of the love. The porch was repainted, the old barn was restored, the fields were green, rows of corn stretching endlessly into the horizon, swaying like they were dancing to Ava's laughter. Ava had built a small flight hangar on the far edge of the property, not extravagant, just enough for her to stay connected to the sky she still loved. But she spent most of her time on the ground now, planting, cooking, laughing, living. The house echoed with music again. Her voice filled the air, singing off-key, humming while baking, giggling when flour exploded all over Ethan's shirt. They created a rhythm that didn't need choreography, and in the stillness of the farm, love grew wild. One quiet afternoon, Ethan found a letter tucked into Ava's old duffel bag, the same one she'd carried from the wreckage. It was dated months ago. Ethan, if you're reading this, I probably left again. It's not because I wanted to. It's because I got scared. Scared of being loved in a way I never thought I deserved. But if I stayed, if I finally stopped running, it's because of you. Because you made the quiet feel safe. You made the earth feel like sky. And because you taught me that sometimes, the best kind of flight is the one that lands in someone's arms. Forever, Ava. He pressed the letter to his chest, eyes brimming. She hadn't left. She stayed, because of him. One morning, as they watched the sun rise from the porch swing, Ava turned to him and said, I've been thinking, what if we turned the hangar into something more, a place where kids from small towns can learn to fly, for free, especially the ones who never get the chance. That we can give them both, the sky and the soil. Ethan looked at her, his eyes glowing. "You want to change lives," she smiled. "I just want to give them what you gave me." That evening, under a cotton candy sky, Ethan brought her to the center of the field, the exact place she crashed. But now, it was filled with wildflowers, and right there, barefoot, standing in the very soil that had once broken them both, Ethan took her hand. "I don't have a ring yet," he said, voice soft, "but I have this land, this heart, and this life, and I want all of it to be yours." Tears slipped from her eyes. "You already gave me everything," she whispered, and then in the place where the past had ended, they sealed the beginning, with a kiss that tasted like forever. A year later, children ran through the fields laughing, Ava's aviation program thriving. The farmhouse was fuller now, of life, of voices, of dreams. And as a small plane took off into the blue sky, Ethan wrapped his arms around Ava's waist from behind. He whispered into her ear, "I thought I saved you that night." She leaned back against him, smiling. "Turns out," she said, "you were the one who needed rescuing." They stood together in the sunlight, two souls that had crashed, landed, and grown roots, and love at last had found its home.